Guilliman roars a challenge at the word-bearers. He condemns them to death. He condemns their master to a worse fate. He hurls himself at them. The word-bearers on the upper structures see him coming. They are Kill Squad strength, at the least, the better part of a full company. At least a portion of them are the vaunted Gal Vorbak elite. But they see him coming, and they know what that means. It doesn't matter what cosmic dementia has corrupted their minds and souls. It doesn't matter what eternal promises the dark gods are whispering in their ears. It doesn't matter what inflated courage the warp has poured into their veins along with their madness. Guilliman of Ultramar is coming right at them. To kill them. To kill them all. Even though they stand a chance of hurting him, they waste it. They balk. For a second, their twisted hearts know fear. Real fear. And then he has them. And he is killing them. The battles of the Horus Heresy are among the bloodiest engagements ever waged by humanity. Brother slew brother as malevolent entities cackled within the roiling depths of the warp, the atrocities inflicted upon humanity feeding their insatiable hunger for suffering. Yet the most treacherous of actions reward their perpetrators with greater spoils, and though much blood had already been spilled with the dawn of the heresy, one battle above all exemplified the conniving nature of the traitor rebellion. For today, we shall elucidate the scheme of a madman lured with the promise of vindication at the price of betraying his kin. This is the tale of the Calth atrocity.
We called them false angels. You came to me asking how my faith survived the day of judgment. I will tell you a secret. When the stars fell, when the seas boiled and the earth burned, my faith didn't die. That is when I began to believe. God was real, and he hated us.
To attempt to understand the reasoning of heretics is a pointless endeavor, for the excuses of murderers and zealots lead further down the path to corruption. Yet to learn from the Calth atrocity, one must look to the past for the spark which ignited the flames of betrayal. Lorgar Aurelian, Primarch of the 17th Legion, the Word-Bearers, had taken to the stars during the Great Crusade as among the last of his kind to be reunited with the Imperium. The Imperial Heralds of old had been remade in the image of the Rainmaker of Colchis, their methods of bringing compliance to rebellious worlds bordering on the profane. Dismissive of the ideals of the Imperium as a secular empire devoted to reason and cold logic, the Word-Bearers Legion erected gaudy temples, cathedrals, and statues devoted to the Emperor. The flagrant idolatry of the Master of Mankind, an affront to his most cherished ideals to foster the Imperium into a new age of prosperity, such religious offerings and dogma could not be allowed to continue. During 963.M30, a council of the Emperor's most trusted advisors convened, led by his stalwart and trusted ally, Malcador the Sigillite. Deeming censure to be the only course of action, the Emperor dispatched Malcador to the world of Kur and decreed his will. Accompanied by the Ultramarines Legion and their venerated Primarch, Rabute Guilliman, this army of paragons in gleaming blue ceramite championed the ideals of the Imperial truth to the letter, and would be a fitting means to raise the city to the ground. Lorgar Aurelian confronted the Sigillite within his perfect city, as Guilliman looked on, his duty to his father superseding his unwillingness to tear down Monarchia's towering icons of marble and gold. Following the Ultramarines' evacuation of the civilian populace, they turned their guns on the shrines to the God Emperor of mankind. The folly of the Word-Bearers and their brazen worship too dangerous to spread further. the entire Legion of the 17th returned to Kerr, with word of the destruction of Monarchia, tears welling in their eyes as they watched their perfect city burn. The Urizen was inconsolable, striking the Sigillite with his fist as smoke billowed from the ruins of Monarchia, his assembled legion itching for a chance at reprisal. Until they knelt. Casting his psychic presence across the planet of Kerr, the Emperor forced every one of the Wordbearers to their knees in submission to his will. The Ultramarines stood tall. Not one of their number took pride in their actions, least of all their Primarch. But their duty as witnesses to the humbling of the 17th was necessary. Such a harsh lesson would not be learned by the Urizen, for his heart had always festered with bitterness, poured into his soul drip by drip by the hands of those who had raised him. And under the advisements of his foster father, Khor Phaeron, and his first chaplain, Erebus, Lorgar Aurelian embarked upon a pilgrimage. Finding the answers he sought within the heart of the Eye of Terror, a pantheon thirsting for the devotion of mortals answered his naive calls for guidance. Though Horus Lupercal was destined to be the champion of the gods of chaos, Lorgar had been chosen as the architect of their will. Yet none remember those who stand behind the veil of great change, and the bearer of the word was nothing if not conceited. As they left the first transit voidlock, an Ultramarine stepped forward to challenge the unexpected boarding party. He was not wearing his cobalt blue helm, clearly not expecting an attack, nor yet realizing that he had but seconds to live. Absurdly, he did not even reach for his weapon. His face bore an expression of puzzlement. Marduk laughed to himself. Oh, this was too good. The Ultramarine, a sergeant by his markings, opened his mouth to voice. What? A greeting? A challenge? Either way, he never got the chance to speak. A bolt round was fired, the first of many that would be unleashed in the next few minutes. The Ultramarine was struck in the face, just under his left cheekbone. Faces turned, mouths gaped open, aghast, as crew members registered the headless Ultramarine splayed out on the deck. Blood was spreading in a widening circle around him. It dropped down through the metal slats in the decking. Most of those stationed here were non-combatants, the majority being technicians and adepts. The Word-bearers did not waste their ammunition. They moved in with chainblade and fist, snapping bodies like dried tinder, punching heads from shoulders. It was soon over. Marduk reached his master's side. Blood and oil spattered the captain's armor, forming rivulets in the gaps between the interlocking plates of his armor. For over 4 decades, the Word-bearers plotted in secret, their numbers slowly cleansed of dissenting voices and loyal Astartes to the Emperor's cause. During 005.M31, the Ascended War Master of Chaos began his gambit to rule the stars, starting with displacing his unawares brethren across the void, far from the conflict to follow. The Dark Angels, Blood Angels, and Ultramarines were a threat too great to combat head-on, the Sons of Arute Gilliman especially so, due to their status as the largest legion by far. Ordering the 13th to muster at the world of Kalth, their distance from the staging ground of the opening salvos of the Civil War proved vital. The traitor legions commit untold acts of butchery upon the world of Istvan Free, its soil drenched in the blood of pious souls and their duplicitous former comrades. Yet as the events of the War Master's schemes began to unfold, survivors of the battles had managed to escape annihilation and warned the Imperium of the impending wrath of the traitors. A counter-offensive had waged upon Istvan V, yet with the conclusion of the Dropsite massacre, the traitors had become further emboldened with new allies to their cause and the annihilation of 3 loyalist legions. Horus was winning the war, yet the potential reprisal of the Ultramarines could not be ignored. Ordering Lorgar to venture to the Viridian system within Ultramar, The Word-Bearers met with the Ultramarines under the pretense of purging the Orc Xenos hold of Gazlak as an act of cooperation. Welcomed with open arms by their stoic brethren, the Sons of Lorgar positioned themselves within the ranks of the 13th Legion, fully armed and clad in warplate. Assuming their crestfallen comrades to be hiding the stain of dishonor they had incurred decades prior, the Ultramarines could not have known the true intent of these malevolent turncoats. Seeking to claim an eye for an eye, the agri-world of Calth symbolized the prosperity of the Ultramarines, and Lorgar salivated at the idea of its verdant hills and bountiful crops' transformation into a desolate wasteland. First Captain Cor Ferron commanded the Legion in Lorgar's stead, their objective to cripple the 13th Legion and, if possible, end the life of the Lord of Ultramar. Capturing the Ultramarines' voidcraft, the Campanile, within the Viridian system of space, its crew were offered as ritual sacrifices to the Word-Bearers' dark gods. Interfering with Calth's orbital data feeds, the mortal menials of Ultramar toiled to clear the distorted communications of their equipment, whilst the Campanile's denizens maneuvered into position. Psychers of the Legion's Librarius suffered severe headaches, their abandoning of their gifts following the Edict of Nicaea preventing their forewarning of the impending threat. Scrap code infections came to the attention of the Mechanicus server, Ulkehal Hest, within the watchtower of Calcus Fortalice, whilst more vessels of the Word-Bearers' fleet arrived in orbit, painted in an unfamiliar arterial crimson hue. The Infidus Imperator, grand cruiser and flagship of Cor Ferron, loomed over Calth, its proximity allowing for First Chaplain Erebus to teleport onto its surface to the north of Numinous City. The Hand of Fate began his fell rituals to call forth the powers of the warp, surrounded by polished black stones taken from the Istvan V dropsite massacre. Offering progenoid glands harvested blood and gene seeds from the fallen of both traitors and loyalists of the Battle of Istvan III and V. With the moon rising in perfect constellational alignment, the moment had come to act.
My brother, hear me. Warriors of the 13th Legion, hear me. This violence is against the code of the Legiones Astartes and against the will of our father, the Emperor. In the name of the 500 worlds of Ultramar, I implore you to cease fire and stand down. Open communication with me. Let us speak. Let us settle this. This action is an error of the most tragic kind. Cease fire. I, Rabute Guilliman, give you my solemn pledge that we will deal with each other frankly and fairly if these hostilities can be suspended. I urge you to respond.
The Campanile passed the defense ring of Calth, its momentum sharply accelerating into a direct collision course with the orbital dockyard complex. Smashing through smaller vessels and scraping past larger strike cruisers, the Azimuth graving dock vaporized in its wake. The debris of obliterated spacecraft scattered across the orbit of Calth, raining death hails of debris upon the unfortunates below. 35,000 men and women perished in the ensuing carnage, the power core of the orbital fleet yard hearkening the demise of the Campanile. Aboard the Ultramarines' voidcraft, Samothrace, Captain Sorat Chur of the Word-Bearers slaughtered Captain Honorius Luciel and his entourage of the 209th Company. Unarmed and caught unawares during their formal dinner organized to honor their guests, those who survived the ambush were offered as sacrifices before Sorat Chur murdered the entire bridge crew. The Calth Viridian anchor had sustained heavy damage, and as Word-Bearers and Chaos Cultists alike conducted hundreds of small ambushes among the fleet, pandemonium spread. Firestorms erupted within the many orbital stations at high anchor, the communications of the Mechanicus irreparably damaged, and countless dead littered the void of space. The data shock incurred from the scrap code infection caused neural biofeedback among the adepts of Mars, their numbers dwindling as hypertraumatic inload syndrome ravaged their numbers. The infidus Imperator opened fire upon the Ultramarines' fleet, their shields inoperative and moorings still clamped to the inoperable docking stations. The battle barge Sons of Ultramar exploded in the first vicious salvo as other 17th Legion vessels such as the Machael, Crown of Colchis, Flame of Purity, and Destiny's Hand combined their firepower. The Ultramarines' fleet looked on helplessly. Their ship's power plants kept on low yield in preparation to depart for the Orc stronghold, unable to combat their foes. Roboute Guilliman witnessed the unfolding massacre. His belief that a catastrophic technical failure was the cause for this slaughter, the only reasonable conclusion he could draw. Unable to communicate with the Wordbearers Legion, the Lord of Ultramar broadcast a message beseeching the Sons of Lorgar to stand down. No harm would come to them should the fighting end. Khor Pharon boarded the Samothrace as it passed unchallenged through the Zetsun Verid fleet yard. Capturing the facility from its unaware defenders, his Dark Mechanicum allies worked to establish their own data network and activated the planet's weapons grid. 962 orbital defense platforms turned their guns on the remnants of the Ultramarines' fleet, which had already lost approximately 80% of its number. Using the Calphian defense grid to destroy the moon of the Verida Forge and Starfort in proximity to the Viridian System's Mandeville Point, the Loyalists suffered further catastrophic losses to both lives and infrastructure. The largest capital ships of the Ultramarines' fleet comprised their remaining strength, too large and well-armored to be destroyed swiftly, yet for each that attempted to power up their shields, the guns of Calph's weapon grid pacified such threats. Every defense platform restored by their crews fell to the guns of the Wordbearers' fleet, the Solar Auxilia receiving massive casualties despite valiantly fighting to the last. Defending their homeworld from the tyrants of the 17th, each mortal soldier gladly gave their lives in the name of Calph. Each small victory in repelling the Wordbearers, though minimal, brought time for the Ultramarines to reorganize.
Lorgar of Colchis, you may consider the following. 1. I entirely withdraw my previous offer of solemn ceasefire. It is cancelled and will not be made again, to you or to any other of your motherless bastards. 2. You are no longer any brother of mine. I will find you. I will kill you. And I will hurl your toxic corpse into hell's mouth.
Two solar hours following the rampage of the Campanile, the crew of the Macragge's Honor, flagship of the Ultramarines, managed to establish contact with Lorgar Aurelian. Demanding that Lorgar order his men to stand down, Guilliman watched in horror as a smile crossed his cowardly brother's lips. Exchanging barbed words with the Urizen, it soon became clear that none of this was a mistake. The Rainmaker had unleashed this storm of blood upon Calph intentionally. Resolving to preserve his legion, Guilliman ordered his men to defend themselves. The bridge of the Macragge's Honor was invaded by a chaos-spawn creature of the Warp, the subsequent explosion of the entity venting the Lord of Ultramar into the void of space. First Chapter Master Marius Gage managed to brace himself until the ship's bridge sealed itself from the damage. His Genesire potentially lost, it was now his duty to deliver his legion to salvation. Wordbearers littered the halls of this proud Gloriana-class vessel, with the dismembered limbs of fallen Astartes and mortals, their desecration spilling chaos spawn amongst its vast confines. Ordering the crew of the ship to barricade themselves into the ship's compartments, Gage attempted to rally the Ultramarines and naval guardsmen aboard into a cohesive force. Waves upon waves of chaos filth continued to clamor from micro-rifts across the ship, its defenders corralling such creatures into enclosed spaces filled with poison gas and unbreathable atmospheres to no avail. Their bolters and lasguns proved ineffective against these immaterial beings, as detonations and impact sites seemed to do little more than inconvenience these horrors of the Warp. Blades and melee weapons proved more effective against these abominations. Yet many lacked the skill or bravery to combat such foes in such close proximity. Much of the officer class of the Legion had been slain, with few able to lead the survivors of the ambush effectively. Chapter Master Claude Empion and his 9th chapter, and Captain Heutonic of the 161st Company, fought bravely in repelling the invading demons of the Warp, yet were stifled by their adherence to conventional battle doctrines in the face of these otherworldly foes. Yet on this day of unremitting heresy, an unlikely soul proved crucial in combating such unorthodox enemies.
If he wasn't my brother, he'd be a political embarrassment and an impediment to the effective rule of the Imperium. I know what I'd do with him.
I'm sure I could demonstrate how, Lord.
Was that a joke, Sergeant?
I may have just made a very unfortunate attempt at humour, Lord.
It was actually quite funny.
Prior to the first shot fired by the guns of the Word-Bearers and the arrival of their fleet, a lone Ultramarine sergeant awaited judgment. Sergeant Aeonid Fiel of the 135th Company awaited censure for his compiling of theoretical tactics on how to battle Space Marines. Prior to this day, the idea of the Emperor's angels fighting one another was unthinkable, among the highest of heretical thoughts in the eyes of many a noble warrior. Yet Aeonid had surmised that due to the fact the Imperium had conquered the stars, there were no new foes to combat, and so the only thought experiment that remained was that of his peers. Ordered to paint his helmet red as a mark of his transgression, Fiel paced his Primarch's own antechamber as he awaited the judgment of his Primarch. The invaders of the Macragge's honor burst through the Primarch's quarters, yet did not catch this rebellious sergeant off guard. Borrowing an exotic longsword and Kelatai friction axe from Roboute Guilliman's personal collection of weapons, Aeonid slew his aggressors and investigated the mayhem outside. Fighting through the hordes of foes which he dubbed as demons, Aeonid assembled survivors of the fray and armed them with his Primarch's collection of mastercrafted armaments. Etching notes onto his armor on his experience fighting these strange foes, Fiel made contact with Chapter Master Empion and Captain Heutonicus as they ventured to the conning tower. Managing to reach the flagship epicenter, Fiel's misfit band of Astartes, labor serfs, mortal soldiers, deckhands, and abhuman stokers wielding weapons befit for the stature of a son of the Emperor were a peculiar sight to behold. Saving the life and treating the wounds of Marius Gage, though bewildered by the appearance of Fiel's band of warriors, the first Chapter Master understood his effectiveness in combating these demons. Having lost his arm in battle, Gage entrusted Fiel with tactical leadership whilst an apothecary tended to his wounds. Ordering all forces to carve a path to the ship's auxiliary bridge, Gage accompanied Fiel's forces in their attempt to reactivate the ship's controls. Rescuing Shipmaster Hamed from a salvation craft of the vessel, Sanctity of Saramanth, Fiel escorted the captain to the bridge with Gage appointing the veteran to helm the Macragge's honor.
Kinsman, we are being tested. We cannot know what madness has overcome Lorgar. We do not know the fate of our brothers and our Primarch. But what we do know is duty. Our duty is to hold the approach to the city, to deny the enemy. These were Guilliman's last words to us. Meles gave his life in service of that command. And if called, then so shall we.
As the sons of Roboute Guilliman fought to purge the warp filth from the vessel, the servants of the Machine God had not been idle. Sealed within their precious shrine of the Omnissiah, the Skitarii defended their sacred machines from invaders. Aided by Aeonid Fiel and Marius Gage, the warriors of Mars followed the examples of the Ultramarines and brandished hand-to-hand weapons to combat the demons. Turning the tide against the warp spawn, the Tech Adepts pledged their Castellax battle automata to cleanse the ship, with their holy site now preserved from trespassers. With the technical prowess of 2 senior Magos of the Mechanicum, at the 10th hour of the battle, functionality was restored to the flagship. Awakening communications, Gage rallied the disparate Ultramarines' forces, enduring the countless threats besetting them on all sides, both in orbit and on the surface of Calth. The remaining fleet of the Ultramarines plotted course to support the Macragge's honor, now that it was no longer adrift. Yet as they maneuvered, the full might of the Wordbearers fell upon the flagship. Chapter Master Empion led the counter-boarding assault, with 1,200 Astartes by his side, sabotaging docking towers, releasing void grapnels, and repelling invaders from the ship's outer hull. Equipped with void harnesses, Empion's squads used the low gravity of the ship to swiftly bound into combat and quell their enemies dug in across the ship's exterior. Bolter fire erupted from the guns of the Angels of Death, yet in the silence of space, their otherwise deafening volleys were not heard. Ordering 3 men in each squad to place melter charges on the Wordbearers' breaching equipment, many noble sons of Ultramar sacrificed their own lives in order to detonate their payloads. Aenid Thiel led Squad 6, his men surrounded by vast numbers of Wordbearers' Astartes, resolving to give their lives dearly before surrendering to despair. Yet in their moment of greatest peril, their Primarch returned. Pummeling the Wordbearers to red mist with his power fists, Rabute Guilliman's superhuman physiology had allowed him to endure in the void of space for 10 hours with no oxygen nor helmet. His anger stoked by the deception of Lorgar, seemingly fueling him to endure this impossible feat. With Thiel's squad relieved from the traitor's assault, the Ultramarines returned with their Primarch to the safety of the bridge.
Leave no stone upon stone. Salt the earth with the blood of the fallen, and leave only ashes to mark their passing. Let Calth be the grave marker of the Ultramarines.
Magos Tauren of the Mechanicum, with the support of Captain Remus Ventanus, consolidated the might of her Skitarii with the Ultramarines' 4th Company. Opposed by thousands of traitor Astartes and countless cultist militias, Tauren advised to reactivate the Governor's Palace Vox Assembly to facilitate communications with beleaguered Ultramarine survivors. As the forces of the Wordbearers' commander, Morpul Sia, surrounded the Palace of Leptis Numinus, their cannon fodder of cultists shielded the Astartes from the bolter rounds of the Ultramarines. Demonic entities spewed from the Empyrean, their rabid advances breaching the defensive lines of the palace, manned by mortal soldiers of Calth. The 4th Company arrived in time to preserve the palace, the sight of the Angels of Death spurring the soldiery on to push back the tide of the traitor attack. Tauren toiled to reactivate the data engine of the communications array, for should they contact the fleet in orbit, fire support could prove crucial in aiding the reclamation of the service. Remus knew that their defiance would not last long, for within mere hours the traitors could amass enough strength to overrun their position. Restoring communications, Ventanus made contact with his Primarch and relayed the situation unfolding on the ground. 30,000 Astartes and over 200,000 Imperial Army forces remained scattered, yet fighting upon the surface. Obtaining a kill code to purge the planetary defense grid of infection, should the Ultramarines in orbit destroy the controls located within the Zetsun Verid fleet yard, the Fortress of Calth could secure the data engine required to restore the planetary weapons grid to Loyalist hands. Rallying a column of Land Raider tanks to push through the Wordbearers' lines, Ventanus reached the Cargo Handling Guild to the north of the port of Lanshia. Tauren uploaded the kill code, as Wordbearers and Titans, under the leadership of Commander Holbeloth, attempted to thwart their efforts. Though progress was slow, the foundations of the Guildhall held true in the wake of the traitor assault, as the defenders held the line for their kin in orbit to achieve their objective. Victory is a fickle mistress, failure a haphazard executioner. For those with the courage to preserve will not abide their dictates. Guilliman looked upon the fallout the Word-Bearers had wrought. Entire worlds had been sundered, his fleet lay in ruins, and thousands of his valiant sons were dead. Calth's surface teemed with Chaos cultists and the scum of the 17th, their butchery exterminating the Ultramarines' 9th chapter in its entirety upon the soil of Komesh. Elements of the Legion, led by Triarch Toro Nicodemus, led a mobile resistance of survivors, the guns of traitor Titans laying waste to swathes of those unfortunate enough to find themselves within their shadows. The Ultramarines acknowledged the crimson of the Word-Bearers' new heraldry simply as Traitors Red, and relished any opportunity to spill the blood of those who had massacred their kin. Bodies of the fallen sons of Guilliman, showing signs of being mutilated and even feasted upon, were nailed to effigies in the sides of buildings, their desecration drawing out those who could not abide such a slight on their proud legacy. Less than 12 hours had passed, and approximately 100,000 Astartes had perished, deaths which Guilliman resolved to avenge. Rerouting the power of the Macragge's honor to its teleporter systems, Guilliman led a kill team into the heart of the Zetsun Verid Yard in order to reclaim the orbital platforms. 50 men at the side of their liege assembled at the teleportation terminal, yet 4 noble warriors were lost due to rematerializing errors. Slaying dozens of Word-Bearers, including members of the demon-possessed Gal Vorbak. Despite the martial skill of their Primarch, several Astartes under his command fell to the guns of their foes. Confronting Kor Phaeron within the control room of the Fleet Yard, Guilliman walked into the trap of the Master of the Faith. Striking the Lord of Ultramar with forms of living darkness spewing from the palm of his hand, the favor of the ruinous powers coursed through his veins. Pinning the Primarch with eldritch powers against a bulkhead, fell electrical discharge coursed through Guilliman's body, rendering him weakened from their brawl. Kor Phaeron raised his Athame dagger, and mused on whether to end Guilliman's life or sway him to the traitor cause. Perhaps Phaeron could emulate the efforts of Erebus's manipulations of the War Master, for surely, with the aid of the Lord of Ultramar, victory in the name of Chaos would be assured. Placing the dagger against the Primarch's throat until its edge bit into his skin, Kor Phaeron demanded the son of the Emperor kneel before the War Master and pledged to aid his cause. The arrogance of the Dark Cardinal nearly cost him his life, his hubris allowing Guilliman to tear his primary heart from his chest with his Power Fist. Destroying the Dark Mechanicum's planetary data network, the Ultramarines rushed to Guilliman's aid as Kor Phaeron retreated from the fray. The Tetrarchs of Ultramar, under the command of Ikos Lamiad, waged war upon the region of Holofusicon, supported by the loyalist Praesagius and Oberon Legios. Tech Magos Taran, now free to operate the planetary defense grid, unleashed a tactical nuclear strike upon the northern traitor-controlled region of Lanshir. Atomizing the traitor Titans, armored vehicles, and auxiliary forces within the blast radius, radiation burns and burst eardrums were a small price to pay for the loyalist defenders. Turning her weapons platforms against the Word-Bearers' fleet, the guns of Magos Taran devastated the Word-Bearers' fleet with impunity. Guilliman's men fell back from the Zetsun Verid Fleet Yard, the sight of the Word-Bearers' fleet firing its guns upon the Viridian System's sun, striking him with dread. The sun went supernova, the death knell of this celestial body promising death to all those who remained upon Calth's surface. Ordering First Chapter Master Marius Gage to pursue Kor Phaeron's retreating vessel, the Infidus Imperator, at the helm of the Macragge's honor, Guilliman would not allow the Dark Cardinal to escape justice. Yet the woes besetting Ultramar were not over, for Lorgar Aurelian, now allied with the Primarch of the World Eaters Legion, Angron, began to enact their campaign of the Shadow Crusade. Thousands of the Legion detested the Ultramarines. Lorgar ordered many of us to gather when we were already en route to Calth. I, and the others who would become commanders and apostles among the Vakrajal. He wanted our counsel on what to do with those among the Legion he no longer trusted. Our Legion culled its ranks in a trickle down the decades, but nothing like the Istvan atrocity that Angron is so proud of. Lorgar knew loyalty within the Word-Bearers was never in doubt. Competence was a different matter. Even Khan was ignoring the struggling Ultramarine now. He was silent as Agultal continued. Lord Aurelian asked what we would do with the warriors he felt were no longer reliable, those whose hatred burned brighter than their sense. Tens of thousands of them, Khan. Whole companies. Whole chapters. Their rage was no longer pure. You killed them. Not directly. We gave them the mission they craved. They sallied with Erebus and Khor Pharon to martyr themselves in glory. You can't be serious, said Khan. As serious as the wasteland this world has become. Your legion was purged on Istvan Free, brother. Mine was purged at Calth. As the sun of the Viridian system turned from a warm yellow to hues of sickly blue, volatile solar flares ravaged Calth's atmosphere, killing all organic life. Not even the Astartes could survive the surface of this now death world. Its populace, largely unable to heed the calls for evacuation, instead sought shelter within the planet's subterranean arcology system. Protected from the rays of radiation bombarding the surface, the civilian populace fell prey to many word-bearers Astartes, abandoned by their legion within the warrens of the tunnels. Ultramarine task forces rooted out the surviving word-bearers' presence, the heroic Captain Remus Ventanus resolving to liberate the world to which he now bore the title of its savior. The underground war waged for 7 solar years, the 19th, 22nd, and 547th chapters exterminating the forces of the Word-Bearer's Third Hand, Graven Star, and Gal Vorbak. The ruin storm of Erebus had trapped the 13th within Ultramar, and their strength had been substantially pacified. With the Battle of Calth concluded, the Ultramarines had lost 119,422 men, diminished from their might of 185,923 Astartes. Over 50,000 zealots of the Word-Bearer's Legion had martyred themselves and half of their fleet in the name of their fell gods. 28,392 Ultramarines that survived could never take to the field of battle again. Their wounds incurred, rendering them incapable to fight, and the line of the Legio Praesagius were annihilated. 500,000 mortal soldiers and untold millions of the citizens of Calth had perished defending their homeworld. And now, it was little more than a barren, irradiated death world. Among the casualties of the Ultramarines' fleet, the Antipathy, Antrodamicus, Antrophiles, Campanile, Constellation of Tarmus, Courage of Conor, Deliverance of Terra, Gladius, Hope of Narmenia, Janiverse, Johannippus Artemisia, Menace of Fortis, Remonstrance of Narfan Droom, Sanctity of Samaranth, Sons of Ultramar, Spirit of Conor, Stations of Ultramar, Valediction, Vosphorus, and Phobos Encoder were lost with all hands. Captains Ericon Gaius, Teus Sulus, Master Aruk Serotid, and Colonel Sparzai gave their lives to defend Calth, and the full honor roll of the brave souls who perished shall never be collated. 40,000 Astartes of the chapter, both wounded and combat-ready, remained to defend the war-torn Agriworld, the sacrifice of their kinsmen never to be forgotten so long as they stood upon its soil. The Ultramarines as a legion could never recover from the loss of their combat-ready Voidcraft. Their efforts to salvage the broken husks from the debris in orbit of Calth, though necessary, costing many lives to brave the radiation-soaked graveyard of ships. Though this crucible of war had strengthened many valiant souls, with chapters such as the 4th Aurorans, Eagles of the 20th, Hawks of the 21st, and Nemesis chapter of the 22nd, forging their destinies as future successor chapters of the Adeptus Astartes. Calth endures to this day, yet its populace must shelter from the rays of its tainted sun to prevent cancerous growths and radiation sickness. Never would Ultramar suffer such calamity unprepared, for the scarred surface of this once verdant world serves as a reminder to remain vigilant. For the greatest atrocities are made by those we trust, for it is all the easier to stab a brother in the back rather than a stranger. Guilliman steps into the hololithic platform. Light bends and bubbles in front of him. Images form and fade, reform and decay, like scratching light on film. Then Lorgar is standing there, life-size, facing Guilliman. His face is in shadow again, but the light construction makes him look utterly real.
"Have you lost your temper, Roboute?"
Lorgar asks. "I am going to gut you," Guilliman replies softly.
You have lost your temper. The great and calm and level-headed Roboute Guilliman has finally succumbed to passion.
I will gut you. I will skin you. I will behead you.
Ah, Roboute,
Lorgar murmurs.
Here, at the very end, I finally hear you talk in a way that actually makes me like you.
Precondition of malice, says Guilliman, barely a whisper.
You took the Campanile. By my estimation, you took it at least 140 hours ago. You took the ship, and you staged it. You organized this atrocity, Lorgar, and you made it seem like a terrible accident so you could capitalize on our mercy. You made us stay our hand while you committed murder. It's called treachery, Roboute. It works very well. How did you find out? We backplotted the Campanile's route once we'd worked out what had hit the yards. When you look at the plot, the notion that it was any kind of accident becomes laughable. As is the notion that you can hurt me. We're not going to debate it, you maggot, you treacherous bastard, says Guilliman. I just wanted you to know that I will rip your living heart out, and I want you to know why. Why? Why? If this is our puerile old feud boiled to the surface, then you are the most pathetic soul in the universe. Pathetic. Our father should have left you out in the snow at birth. He should have fed you to rust, you worm, you maggot. Lorgar raises his face slightly, so that Guilliman can see a hint of a smile in the shadows of his face. This has nothing to do with our enmity, Roboute, except that it affords me the opportunity to avenge my honor on you and your ridiculous toy soldiers. This is just a delicious bonus. No, this is the Ushkul Fu. Kalf is the Ushkul Fu. The offering. It is the sunrise of the new galaxy. A new order. You're rambling, you bastard. The galaxy is changing, Roboute. It is turning upside down. Up will be down and down will be up. Our father will be tossed out of his throne. He will fall down, and no one will put him back together again. Lorgar, you. Listen to me, Roboute. You think you're so clever, so wise, so informed, but this has started already. It's already underway. The galaxy is turning on its head. You will die, and our father will die. And so will all the others, because you are all too stupid to see the truth. Guilliman steps towards the Lifercast Phantom, as though he might strike it down or snap its neck. Listen to me, Roboute. The Light Ghost hisses. Listen to me. The Imperium is finished. It is falling. It is going to burn. Our father is done. His malicious dreams are over. Horus is rising. Horus? Horus Lupercal is rising, Roboute. You have no idea of his ability. He is above us all. We stand with him, or we perish entirely. You shit, Lorgar. Are you drugged? Are you mad? What kind of insanity is Horus? Horus what? He's rising. He's coming. He will kill anyone who stands in his way. He will rule. He will be what the Emperor could not be. Horus would. Guilliman clears his throat. He swallows. He is dazed by the sheer extent of Lorgar's dementia. Horus would never turn. If any of us turned, the others would. Horus has risen against our cruel and abusive parent, Roboute, says Lorgar. Accept that,
and you will die with greater peace in your heart. Horus Lupercal has come to overthrow the Imperium's corruption and punish the abuser. It is already happening, and Horus is not alone. I am with him, sworn and true. So is Fulgrim, Angron, Perturabo, Magnus, Mortarion, Kurz, Alfarius. Your loyalty is air and paper, Roboute. Our loyalty is blood.
You're lying!
You're dying. Istvan V burns. Brothers are dead already.
Dead? Who are...
Ferrus Manus, Corax, Vulcan, all dead and gone, slaughtered like pigs.
Those are all lies!
Look at me, Roboute. You know they are not. You know it. You have studied every one of us. You know our strengths and our failings. Theoretical, Roboute, theoretical. You know this is possible. You know from the very facts that this is a possible outcome.
Guilliman steps back. He opens his mouth, but he is too stunned to reply.
Whatever you think of me, Roboute,
says Lorgar.
Whatever your opinion, and I know it is about as low as it can be, you know I'm not a stupid man. I would betray my brothers and attack the assembled might of the 13th Legion for a grudge? Really? Really? Practical, Roboute. I am here to exterminate you and the Ultramarines because you are the only force left in the Emperor's camp that can possibly stop Horus. You are too dangerous to live, and I am here to make sure you do not.
Lorgar leans forward. The light catches his teeth.
I'm here to remove you from the game, Roboute.
Guilliman steps back. Either you're insane, or the galaxy has gone mad, he says with remarkable steadiness. Whichever, I am coming for you, and I will put you and your heathen killers down. Excommunicate traitoris. You will not have any opportunity left to reflect upon the monstrosity of this crime.
Oh, Roboute, I can always rely on you to sound like a giant pompous asshole. Come and get me. We'll see who burns first.
Lorgar steps out of the light, and then hesitates.
One last thing you need to know, Roboute. You really don't know what you're up against.
A madman, snaps Guilliman, turning his back. Lorgar alters. His holocast form shifts, like fat melting, like bones deforming, like wax dripping. His smile tears in half, and something rises up out of his human shape. It is not human. Guilliman senses it. He turns back. He sees it. His eyes widen. He can smell it. He can smell the pitch-black nightmare, the cosmic stench of the warp. The thing is growing, still growing. Lorgar's empty skin sloughs off like a snake's. Guilliman steadies himself. He will know no fear.
I've seen enough of his charlatan tricks, he says. Break the Lifercast link.
The link,
begins the master of the Vox.
Sir, the link is already broken.
Guilliman sweeps back towards the nightmare, the thing that is no longer Lorgar. His hand reaches for the hilt of his sword. The thing speaks. Its voice is madness. It says, This has been a tale of the Great Imperium of Man, read by the Remembrancer. The betrayal of the Wordbearers Legion shall never be forgiven nor forgotten by the Imperium and Scions of Ultramar. Such actions were the cause of a wound inflicted so deep that those who perpetrated heresy feel vindicated for their treachery. Beware the barbs of jealousy, hubris, and ego, for therein lies the path trodden by the bearers of the Word. Their bitterness and resentment eternal,
There is no hope of salvation should you descend too deep into the mire. So take to honor, take to courage, and refuse to fall victim to the clutches of spite.